What if someone walked out of the desert claiming they'd seen the future? What if they could prove it, with sketches of machines no one could build, with knowledge no one should have? And what if that man vanished, locked inside a cell that no one could ever open again? July 1947, Fort Ashland Detention Facility, New Mexico. The interrogation room smelled of metal, dust, and fear. A single light swung above the table where Special Agent Daniel Sykes faced the strangest suspect of his career. A pale, tired man in a torn gray coat. The tag on the arrest report called him Michael Keller. But no record of such a man existed anywhere in the country. His wrists were cuffed, yet he sat perfectly still, eyes half open, like he was watching something beyond the room, something far away or far ahead. On the table lay a weathered notebook, filled with diagrams that looked like electrical circuits. Only they curved and folded in impossible geometries. Sykes had seen every kind of madman, every hoaxer, every spy. But this one talked about the year 2025 as if he'd lived it. "You don't believe me, Agent Sykes," Keller said quietly. "You think this is a trick. But tell me, has anyone told you what happens on March 5th, 1953? Sykes frowned. "That's 6 years from now." Keller leaned forward, voice low and calm. "The president will die that morning. Stroke. No witnesses. You'll read about it if you live that long." The agent almost laughed, but the words froze in his throat. Something in Keller's tone, the stillness, the certainty, felt heavier than madness. He flipped through the notebook again. Dates, coordinates, military codes that didn't exist yet. One page showed the blueprint of an engine labeled Temporal Field Inverter Mark I. Sykes called for a guard. "Take him back to his cell." As they pulled Keller up, the prisoner turned and said, almost kindly, "You're not supposed to meet me yet, Daniel. I arrived too early." That night, the guards reported a power surge across the entire facility. Every clock stopped for exactly 7 seconds. When they opened Keller's cell at dawn, it was empty. No signs of escape, no tunnel, no broken lock. Just the notebook, lying open on the cot, its final line written in trembling ink. "The loop is unstable. It's pulling me home." Sykes stared at the words until they burned into his memory. He filed the report, sealed the evidence, and told no one what he truly saw. The faint smell of ozone in the cell, the scorch mark on the wall, the sense that something had passed through that room. Years later, when the world started whispering about Roswell and strange lights in the desert sky, Agent Daniel Sykes would remember the man in the gray coat, the one who had come from nowhere and disappeared into nothing. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Washington, D.C., March 1953. Rain needled the windows of a low, unmarked building in Foggy Bottom while the country held its breath over headlines it could not fully print. Down in the subbasement, behind a door that required 2 keys and a signature, Special Agent Daniel Sykes stepped into a room that didn't officially exist. AID, the Anomalous Investigations Desk, newly grafted onto the CIA like a quiet tumor. The chief didn't sit. "Roswell, your old ghost," he said, sliding a gray archival box across the table. "New intelligence, old mess. Your lead." Sykes lifted the lid and found more redactions than paper. Photostats of the Keller notebook, the same impossible curves, the same fractal wiring of a circuit that seemed to fold back through itself. Chain of custody logs stuttered. Transferred, reviewed, missing, recovered. And tucked under a cardboard flap, a memo stamped deceased 3 times. The names read like a casualty list that no one would speak aloud. Dr. Helen Price, Los Alamos, equipment malfunction, lab light strobing until the glass burst inward. Her watch stopped at 2:17 for exactly 7 seconds. Professor Irving Malloy, MIT consultant. Accidental drowning. The tub was empty. Neighbors heard a low hum through the wall. Lieutenant Arthur Cohen, Army liaison. Cardiac event. The autopsy described subdermal burns in concentric rings, as if something had pressed on him from the inside. Pinned to Price's file was a paper scrap, brown at the edges, pencil scoring deep from a shaking hand. The field is unstable. The past pulls back. Sykes stared long enough to hear the letters breathing. He closed the file and tasted the same metallic afterscent he remembered from 1947, ozone and heat. He worked the list. Price's lab. A pyramid of shattered bulbs under a ceiling fan that ticked on its own, slow and arrhythmic. Malloy's office. Chalkboards flayed with equations that curled into spirals, then stopped mid-stroke. The chalk snapped where a curve doubled back and wrote over itself. Cohen's apartment. A clean circle scorched into the linoleum beneath the kitchen table. Chair legs charred only where they crossed the ring. Witness statements sounded rehearsed by terror. The air shimmered. The radio dragged into a low growl. My fork rattled on the plate. In 3 separate reports, clocks stalled 7 seconds. 7 again. The number fell through Sykes like a trapdoor. He requested the earliest custody copy of Keller's diagrams, pre-redaction, and got a manila folder with the feel of a broken covenant. 1 page labeled temporal field inverter. MK I showed a looped coil nested in a second coil, arrowed lines reversing direction along dotted seams. In the margin, a faint notation in a different hand. Stabilizer? Not yet. Recoil unavoidable. Sykes set the page beside Price's scrap and saw the idea take shape in the space between them. Maybe Keller hadn't escaped. Maybe the system had taken him back, the way a slingshot returns if you let go wrong. Recoil. The past pulling, not as metaphor but as physics. At midnight, he sat alone under the buzzing lamp, listening to an old reel taken from Price's oscilloscope rig. A tone that wasn't a tone. A steady sign that thickened into a throat, then broke into brief, hollow silences, 7 breaths long before returning. In those gaps, he swore he heard paper turning. He wrote a sentence in his notebook and underlined it twice. If the loop exists, disappearance is a byproduct, not intent. The chief wanted a tidy assessment. Sykes gave him a request instead. Access to the Nevada Test Range archives. Anything touched by unexplained power surges since '47. Any incident where clocks hiccuped for 7 seconds and no one could say why. The chief hesitated, then nodded once. Outside, the rain finally broke. Streetlight halos wavered on wet pavement like reflections from a river flowing uphill. Sykes pressed Price's scrap flat with his palm, memorized every graphite groove, and felt the old fear change shape inside him. This wasn't a hunt for a fugitive. It was a fault line running through time, and somewhere ahead the ground would give. When he killed the light, the room exhaled. For a breath, maybe 7. The hum in the walls lifted, and the silence felt almost human, as if someone had just left or hadn't arrived yet. He stood in the doorway and said it aloud, to see if the air would answer. Michael, what did we build? Nevada Test Range, September 1954. The desert was a blank wound of light. Nothing but sand, wind, and the ghost of detonations. At the edge of Ground Zero, Agent Daniel Sykes stood with a Geiger counter whining softly in his hand. The ground still radiated heat from last week's nuclear test. But that wasn't why he was here. He wasn't looking for fallout. He was looking for a pattern. Buried inside a technical report, he'd found a sealed addendum marked non-nuclear phenomena. It described something that shouldn't exist. During detonation Baker 9, for exactly 7 seconds, the explosion froze mid-air. The shockwave halted, suspended like a photograph. Instruments failed, then resumed as if nothing had happened. Technicians thought it was an error. But one of them, a physicist named Dr. Owen Lerner, insisted the cameras captured a temporal distortion. 2 days later, Lerner went missing. His bunker was locked from the inside. All that remained was a metal box, half buried in the sand. Sykes knelt beside it now. The casing was charred black, edges melted inward as if from pressure, not heat. When he brushed away the dust, he saw faint initials scratched into the surface. MK. Inside, wrapped in brittle paper, was a single page from a notebook, precise, symmetrical lines forming a spiral that folded back upon itself. At the bottom, in Keller's handwriting, "Don't let them activate it again." Sykes felt the desert tilt. The hum in the air thickened until his radio coughed static. For a heartbeat, the horizon shimmered, distant rocks bending like heat haze, then stilled. Later, in the command tent, the film from Baker 9 was projected onto a white sheet. Frame by frame, the blast expanded, and then, between one frame and the next, it stopped. Clouds hung motionless. Particles of sand hovered like stars. Then, the film jumped ahead, skipping 7 frames. No camera malfunction. No trick. Just time missing. Sykes closed the projector and stared at the still image of the frozen explosion. Maybe Keller's invention hadn't vanished with him. Maybe the government had already built its next version, without realizing what it truly was. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert, dry thunder, without a cloud in sight. Los Alamos, New Mexico. Spring, 1957. The air inside Lab 12 tasted of copper and ozone. Machines hummed softly in their sleep, and the smell of burned wiring clung to the walls like an old confession. Dr. Thomas Raines, theoretical physicist, had spent 3 nights without leaving his desk. His fingers trembled as he traced the curves of a diagram that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. The lines were too precise, too deliberate. They spiraled into themselves, forming a magnetic pattern that, according to every law of physics he knew, should collapse into nothing. Yet on paper it breathed. The page bore 3 faint letters in the corner. MK. Raines had seen the initials before. He'd been at the Nevada test range when the explosion froze. He remembered how the world had stopped for 7 seconds and then snapped back like a rubber band. The image haunted him ever since. Now, holding these blueprints, he thought he finally understood why. "Reverse magnetic polarity," he whispered, sketching notes into his own journal. "If the field bends around itself, time bends with it." He built the smallest version he could, a ring of copper coils, an improvised power feed, and a stabilizer of his own design. He wanted to see just once if the field would react. At 2:14 a.m., he flipped the switch. The light in the lab dimmed. Every metal object vibrated at a low, impossible pitch. Then silence. The air thickened, bending the fluorescent glare into ripples. For a second, Raines saw movement in the polished steel of the instrument panel. It was a face. His face, older, deeper lines, gray hair at the temples. The reflection looked directly at him. And then it was gone. The field collapsed with a sharp crack. Instruments blew fuses. One coil melted. Raines stumbled backward, pulse hammering. He wrote what he'd seen in trembling ink. Observation. A temporal echo, personal reflection aged approximately 30 years. He didn't sleep that night. The reflection hadn't startled him as much as the expression on its face. Not shock, not fear. Recognition. 3 days later, a black sedan rolled into Los Alamos. Agent Daniel Sykes stepped out, carrying a weathered file. His hair had gone silver at the temples, and his eyes looked like they hadn't closed since 1947. They met in Raines's office. "You've been working off Keller's designs," Sykes said quietly. "Where did you get them?" Rains hesitated, then pulled a folder from his drawer. They arrived anonymously last month. Delivered in a sealed envelope, no return address. Whoever sent them, they knew what they were doing. He opened the folder. Inside lay a new notebook, its cover warped by moisture, pages filled with neat, slanted handwriting. The last page ended with a message in fading ink. If this reaches you, the loop isn't closed yet. Adjust the stabilizer or everything folds back. Sykes recognized the script instantly. Keller, the physicist, nodded. It matches perfectly, but there's something else. He turned the page, a sketch of a massive coil network, labeled Temporal Field Inverter Mark II. At the center was a phrase scrawled in the margin. He's trying to fix it, Agent Sykes. The man who built it, he's still out there. The agent stared at the drawing. His pulse synced with the low hum of the lab equipment. It wasn't over, it had never been over. That night, after Sykes left, Rains reopened his journal and underlined his last note. Temporal echo confirmed. Self-contact possible. In the reflection of the dark window, he thought he saw movement again. A faint shimmer where his reflection should have been still. A hand lifted, slightly delayed. A mouth whispered words he couldn't yet hear. And for the first time, Thomas Rains realized the experiment wasn't showing him the future. It was showing him the moment he'd already lived, but hadn't reached yet. Albuquerque, New Mexico. August 1958. The storm came without warning. Black clouds rolling over the desert like a curtain closing on daylight. Lightning danced over rooftops, but the thunder sounded wrong, deeper, metallic, like something tearing through the sky itself. By the time Agent Daniel Sykes arrived, half the city had gone dark. Power lines hummed like living things, and in the center of the blackout zone stood a perfect circle of scorched asphalt, 10 meters across. Inside it, the rain refused to fall, droplets curved away, as if the air itself was pushing them back. Sykes knelt at the edge. The pavement still vibrated faintly, a low pulse echoing beneath the ground. In the middle of the circle lay a fragment of metal, warped and blackened, faintly etched with the letters MK2. He picked it up carefully. The piece was warm, almost alive. When he turned it over, tiny arcs of static snapped across his glove. Then, just as quickly, the vibration stopped. The storm quieted. The circle cooled. A local patrolman approached, pale and shaking. "Sir, there was someone here before the lightning hit," he said. A man in a gray coat, tall, thin, said he was fixing a machine. Did he give a name? No, but he kept repeating. The stabilizer failed again. Sykes's stomach clenched. Keller. It had to be. That night, in the field office, technicians replayed radio logs from the blackout zone. Every device caught the same anomaly, a 7-second distortion, a pulse of sound like reverse thunder. When filtered, the static revealed something almost human. Fragmented syllables repeating the same phrase. Stop the field before it feeds. Sykes stared at the spectrogram, jagged peaks shaped like a heartbeat. He'd seen this before. 7 seconds frozen out of time, the same signature from Roswell, Nevada, Los Alamos. He opened Rains's notebook again. The physicist's last entry read, temporal echo expanding, localized gravitational bleed observed. Unknown origin. Sykes looked through the rain-streaked window toward the silent city. The power grid flickered once, twice, and for an instant the reflection in the glass wasn't his own. A man in a gray coat stood behind him, watching. Then the light went out. Utah, 1960. In the salt flats west of Dugway, where the wind screamed and the land looked half-burned, the government built something that didn't officially exist. Project Halcyon. Its cover story, electromagnetic weapons research. Its real purpose, to understand Keller's field. Agent Daniel Sykes stood on the observation deck of the underground complex, staring through reinforced glass at a chamber alive with cables and light. Inside, coils as tall as a man pulsed with steady rhythm, blue arcs snaking between them like veins of lightning. The hum was low, constant, hypnotic. They called the machine the inverter. Dr. Thomas Raines, now the project's chief physicist, moved between control panels with the hollow focus of a man who no longer slept. "The math holds," he said, voice brittle. "Magnetic reversal can generate the same frequency Keller recorded in 1947. If we stabilize it," Sykes interrupted. "If you stabilize it, we might recreate what swallowed him." Raines didn't answer. He simply adjusted the dials and whispered, "We have to know what he touched." At 2107, they powered the inverter for the first full cycle. The lights dimmed. Every compass needle on the base spun wild. The sound was no longer a hum. It was a heartbeat, slow and uneven. For 7 seconds, everything stopped. When the emergency systems restored power, one of the technicians was gone. His headset lay smoking on the floor, the cable still warm. No burn marks, no trace of blood. The footage from the control room cameras cut to static the moment he vanished. Exactly 7 seconds of blank tape. Raines found something else. On the technician's console, under a scorch mark, was a torn strip of paper. In faint handwriting, "You're building it again. Stop before it eats time itself." Sykes's pulse hammered. Who wrote that? Raines stared at the words as if they were a mirror. "It's Keller's handwriting," he whispered, "but the ink's fresh." In the days that followed, Halcyon descended into quiet paranoia. Workers spoke of echoes in the corridors, voices answering before they were spoken. Objects shifted positions between shifts. Instruments ticked backward. Raines's notes grew erratic, field expanding on its own. Energy feedback not from generator but from environment. As if time itself contributes. Sykes reviewed the data late one night, when the entire facility seemed to hold its breath. He froze the waveform from the last test. Beneath the static pattern lay a second signal, a human voice whispering under the hum. When he amplified it, the words bled through like something dragged from water. "Daniel, we never stopped it." He recoiled. That was his own voice. He shut off the playback, heart pounding. In the reflection of the dark monitor, he thought he saw another face. Gray coat, hollow eyes, the ghost of Keller, standing just behind him. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. In the hum of the inverter chamber below, Sykes could swear he heard it again. The same rhythm, the same pulse that had haunted him since Roswell. But this time it wasn't the sound of machinery. It was breathing. He whispered into the silence. "If you're still out there, tell me how to stop it." No answer came. Only the deep, trembling vibration of the field building again, unseen and unstoppable, as the halcyon coils began to glow. Nevada desert, July 1973. The air shimmered with heat, a white horizon stretching so far it seemed the world itself had been erased. That morning, NORAD satellites captured an energy spike across the test range. A pulse brighter than lightning, lasting exactly 7 seconds. The pattern matched a signal that hadn't appeared since Project Halcyon. Retired now, Daniel Sykes sat alone in a motel room outside Tonopah, reading the report with trembling hands. He hadn't seen the name Keller in over a decade, yet the coordinates pulled him back like gravity. He drove west, through miles of silence, until the sand turned black. There, in a shallow crater, he found it. A metal box, edges charred, faintly humming as though it remembered being alive. He brushed away ash. The engraving was barely visible but unmistakable. MK, Contour Unit. Inside, wrapped in melted film, was a photograph. Sykes froze. Two men sat at a table beneath a hanging lamp, one in uniform, one in a gray coat. Himself and Keller. The photo was dated July 1947, but Sykes remembered that interrogation. No camera had ever been in the room. He turned the photo over. On the back, scrawled in fading ink, "You were always part of it." His pulse hammered. The desert felt suddenly heavier, as if the air thickened with memory. He looked up. The horizon flickered, and for an instant the world around him blurred into double exposure. The interrogation room overlapping the dunes, the table, the light, the man in gray. Keller's voice, faint and distant, echoed through the wind. "We built it together, Daniel. You just forgot when." Sykes stumbled back, clutching the photograph. The black box emitted a slow, rhythmic click, one beat every second, then faster, until the sound merged into a steady hum. He dropped it, backing away as the sand began to glow faintly blue beneath it. 7 seconds later, the hum stopped. Silence returned, the desert blank again. But when Sykes looked at his reflection in the truck window, for the briefest moment, he saw a gray coat draped over his own shoulders. Langley, Virginia, March 1984. The CIA archive basement smelled of dust and magnetic decay. Rows of metal shelves groaned beneath reels of forgotten surveillance tapes, records from projects that no longer officially existed. Former agent Daniel Sykes, now 70, moved like a man wandering through his own graveyard. His badge still opened doors, though no one could explain why. The Bureau had called it a clerical oversight. Sykes called it unfinished business. He came here following a rumor. A declassified box from Project Halcyon had been transferred to Langley. Inside, fragments of data, old reports, and one reel-to-reel tape labeled only with 2 letters, MK. He threaded it onto the player, pressed play. First, only static. Then a deep pulse, familiar, the same low vibration that had haunted him for decades. And beneath it, a voice. "It's not the past," the voice said, distorted by time. "It's the loop." Sykes's breath caught. It was Keller. He would recognize that tone anywhere. Then, another voice, lower, tired, broken. "Then who am I?" The words stabbed through him like ice. It was his own voice. He froze the tape, played it again. No mistake, Keller and Sykes, together on a recording that should have never existed. But Sykes had no memory of it, no recollection of speaking those words. He checked the date stamped on the reel, June 1960, the height of Project Halcyon. Yet he had no file, no log, no recollection of ever being recorded. He stared at the words inked on the label, "Recovered transmission, Echo Channel, Site 9, the same underground chamber where a technician had vanished. Somewhere, a part of him had been erased. Sykes spent weeks tracing the origins of the reel. Most paths ended in redacted black bars and sealed orders. But one lead remained, a requisition form signed by Dr. Thomas Raines, dated 1957, 3 months after his death at Los Alamos. According to the CIA's personnel registry, Raines never existed. But in a Department of Energy database, under a different name, Dr. Thomas Rainer Sykes found a purchase order for high-capacitance coils and superconducting materials delivered to Silverton, Colorado, a quiet mountain town. He drove there in April. Snow still clung to the peaks, and the valley below smelled of pine and iron. The address led to a decaying cabin halfway up a canyon road. Inside, the air was heavy with ozone. Old instruments lined the walls, oscilloscopes, copper coils, and a single humming power cell. A voice rasped from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come, Daniel." Sykes turned, and there stood Raines, older, thinner, his eyes hollow but alive. "They told me you were dead." Sykes said. I was, Rains replied. Just not all at once. He gestured toward a battered tape deck on the table. That recording you found, it wasn't from the past. It was transmitted forward. The field doesn't care about direction anymore. Sykes stared at him. Then what happened to Keller? Rains smiled faintly, a crack in stone. He's not gone, Daniel. Neither are you. The machine blurred the difference. Wind howled outside. For a moment, the shadows on the walls moved out of sync with their bodies. Delayed, like reflections from a different timeline. Sykes looked at Rains and realized the truth he had avoided for decades. Whatever Keller started in 1947 hadn't ended. It had only learned to speak back. Silverton, Colorado, October 1985. The abandoned mountain observatory sat like a dead eye staring into the night. Snow crept through its shattered dome, coating the old telescope in white dust. Inside, Agent Daniel Sykes and Dr. Thomas Rains worked by lantern light, surrounded by coils, wires, and fragments of something that should have never been rebuilt. They weren't trying to awaken the device. They were trying to end it. Rains laid out the last of the salvaged blueprints, yellowed pages drawn by a hand that no longer belonged to any one man. Some notes were Keller's, some were his own, and some, somehow, were Sykes's, written in his handwriting dated years he couldn't remember living. We complete the circuit, Rains said, voice trembling, and overload it. That should collapse the field permanently. Or start it again, Sykes muttered. They wired the final loop of copper coils, feeding into a cracked stabilizer core. The hum began before they even connected power, a faint vibration that seemed to come from the bones of the earth. Sykes hesitated at the switch. If this works, he said, we erase it all. Him, the field, maybe even the years between. Rains met his eyes. Maybe that's mercy. The generator roared to life. Blue light crawled up the walls, flickering like lightning trapped inside glass. Instruments shuddered. The coils bent, magnetized beyond reason. The hum deepened into a single tone that felt alive. A circle of air in the center of the observatory began to twist, bending light until it formed a spinning column, a vortex, glowing from within, breathing. Rains shouted over the rising wind. Power surge. It's self-feeding. The light exploded outward, illuminating the entire dome in ghostly blue. And within it, a figure stepped forward, blurry, human-shaped, but shifting like smoke caught in water. Sykes froze. The gray coat, the hollow eyes. Keller. He raised his head, voice echoing across dimensions. You completed it. Now it's infinite. The words vibrated through the walls, through their skin, through time itself. Rains stumbled toward the console, yanking cables free. Sparks rained down like stars. Shut it down, Sykes yelled. I can't. It's using us as power. Rains cried back. The vortex expanded. Photographs flew from the tables. Pages of equations lifted, circling like moths around a dying flame. Sykes felt the pull, gravity unraveling, his heartbeat sinking to the 7-second rhythm that had haunted him for 40 years. He grabbed Rains's arm. Cut the main. Rains tore the last wire free, and the world went white. When the snow settled, the observatory was gone. Only a crater remained, lined with scorched metal and half-melted glass. In the ashes, search teams found no bodies, no instruments, only a single notebook. Its cover charred, its pages written in fresh ink. The handwriting matched Daniel Sykes. The last line read, "It wasn't Keller's invention. It was ours." The loop didn't start in 1947. It starts whenever we remember it. Washington, D.C., November 1991. Rain whispered against the windows of the National Archive Annex. where forgotten secrets went to die. Old, gray, and half-forgotten himself, Daniel Sykes shuffled through rows of sealed boxes marked declassified pending review. He wasn't supposed to be there. The clearance was long expired, the badge long invalid, but some doors still remembered his name. A clerk handed him a crate labeled in fading ink, Project Halcyon/Item 047 MK Files. Sykes's hands shook as he pried it open. Inside lay a single metal box, cold and spotless, as though untouched by time. On its lid, engraved with surgical precision, MK the last contour. He hesitated, then lifted the latch. Inside, wrapped in yellowed linen, was a notebook. The paper was new, too new. Fresh ink bled faintly through the pages. On the first sheet, neat handwriting spelled his name. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means the loop starts again. Destroy it before 2025. The blood drained from his face. The signature below the warning was his own. He flipped through the notebook, hands trembling. The diagrams were familiar, the same impossible spirals, but drawn with older, slower strokes. At the end, a final line curved across the page. Time doesn't move forward. It circles back to those who refuse to forget. Sykes looked up. The archive lights flickered once, twice. A low hum began to swell through the floor, the same sound that had haunted him since the interrogation room in 1947. Boxes rattled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. He whispered, "Not again," and reached for the notebook. But the words on the page were already fading, rewriting themselves in trembling ink. Outside, thunder rolled without lightning. Inside, every clock on the wall froze for 7 seconds. The hum deepened until it became a heartbeat. Steady, inevitable. Sykes turned toward the Isle of Shadows and thought he saw a silhouette in a gray coat watching him from the end of the corridor. The lights went out. In the darkness, the hum rose to a blinding pitch and then silence. When the lights returned, the room was empty. Only the metal box remained on the table, closed again. Its engraving had changed. Now it read, MK the first contour, and somewhere far away, beneath the noise of the living world, time began to loop,